Imagine lending someone billions of dollars, right? And, offering your backyard to help them build a business, doing literally everything in your power to keep the neighborhood safe. Then one morning you wake up and you find that very same neighbor is actively setting fire to your house.
Yeah, it's wild.
Right. And not by accident either, but just to make a point to the cops across the street. I mean, that is the exact head-spinning reality playing out in the Middle East right now.
Statecraft.
Yeah.
Because you expect nations to act in their own rational self-interest, right, to carefully preserve their economic lifelines.
Of course.
But what we're witnessing here is a country deliberately sabotaging its own financial and diplomatic life support systems, just betting that the sheer chaos of it all will, I don't know, somehow save them.
It's crazy. Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are incredibly glad you're here with us.
We really are.
And we have a very specific mission for this conversation. We are unpacking a highly complex, potentially historic geopolitical shift. We're looking at Iran's brand new, just seemingly chaotic military playbook.
Right, and to figure out what's actually going on behind the headlines, we're drawing from a deeply researched analytical piece.
Exactly. It was published on the Patreon page KULT, and it's titled, Iran's Escalation Strategy Won't Work.
It's a fascinating read.
It really is. It breaks down like a half-century of Iranian military doctrine, contrasts it with the aggressive pivots happening literally right now, and models out why this massive gamble might lead to just unprecedented isolation.
But before we get into the actual mechanics of this strategy, we need to set a clear parameter for you, the listener.
Yes, very important.
Because the analysis we're unpacking today touches on some of the most volatile geopolitical conflicts on the planet right now. It involves ongoing military campaigns and, highly polarizing political figures, specifically Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu.
Right. And as your guides through this material, we want to be super clear. We are not here to take sides.
Absolutely not.
We aren't endorsing any military actions, and we certainly aren't here to validate or criticize the politics of any leaders we discuss today.
Our sole objective is just to impartially break down the strategic arguments, the historical comparisons, and the military theory exactly as they're laid out in this source.
Exactly. We're just looking at the math of the conflict, plain and simple. And the core mystery we're trying to solve is a big one.
It really is.
Why would a regime purposefully bomb its own allies and economic partners to stop a broader war?
Because it feels completely counterintuitive. I mean, to grasp why this new approach is so shocking and why the analysis argues it's, doomed to fail, we first have to establish the baseline.
Right, the historical context.
Yeah, we have to look at what Iran's strategy has been for the last 50 years.
Okay, let's attack this. Because for decades, Iran actually had a remarkably successful track record, right? Like betting on its ability to control the temperature of the region.
They did. They were absolute masters of pushing the envelope right to the very edge.
But never actually tearing it.
Exactly. They managed the thermometer with incredible precision. I mean, look back at the timeline.
Yeah, let's go back.
From the taking of hostages at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran in 1979 to the bombing of the U.S. Marines barracks in Beirut.
All the way to funding highly capable proxy groups across, Afghanistan, Gaza, Lebanon, and Iraq.
Right. These were massive, massive provocations.
Yeah.
Yet Iran consistently calibrated these actions, so they never triggered the one thing they feared most.
Which is a direct regime-ending military invasion from a superpower.
Spot on. And even when direct clashes did happen, the violence was incredibly restrained. It was almost theatrical in a way.
Oh, totally theatrical. Think back to 2020, right? After the United States killed Quds Force leader Qasem Soleimani,
right,
Iran had to respond to save face domestically. So they launched a ballistic missile strike on 2 U.S. military bases in Iraq. But here is the crucial detail. They used back channels to essentially warn the U.S. it was coming.
Yep.
And they notably killed 0 Americans.
And we saw that exact same choreography much more recently, right?
Right.
Following Operation Midnight Hammer.
Oh, the U.S. strike on the Iranian nuclear site?
Exactly. Tehran responded with a missile strike on a U.S. airbase in Qatar. But again, it was highly managed.
They hit an empty patch of tarmac, didn't they?
They hit an empty patch of tarmac. It was designed to generate a headline for their state media, projecting strength to their citizens, without actually prompting a wider, uncontrollable retaliation from Washington.
It's like 2 people having a tense standoff in a bar, but deliberately pulling their punches just to look tough.
That's a great way to put it.
But now, according to this KULT analysis, one of them has suddenly stopped pulling punches and just started throwing chairs at the bystanders.
Yeah. Iran has completely abandoned the choreography. They're deploying what military strategists call an escalate to de-escalate doctrine.
Escalate to de-escalate.
Right. They aren't just hitting Israeli and U.S. military targets anymore. They're hitting friendly, non-combatant nations.
What's fascinating here is the underlying psychological assumption driving this pivot, though. Like, they are actively targeting places like Oman, Qatar, and Turkey.
And they are aiming at the absolute lifeblood of those countries.
Yeah, oil infrastructure, commercial airports, luxury hotels.
Right. Iran is making a massive bet that economic pain is a much stronger motivator for these regional actors than their security alliances.
The logic is wild, but I guess it's clear. Iran wants to hurt U.S. allies and global trading partners so badly and cause such a massive disruption to the global economy that those countries will start screaming at Washington.
Exactly. Tehran hopes the region will squeeze the U.S. into forcing a ceasefire, basically just to make the economic bleeding stop.
Right. It's an attempt to use chaos as leverage. But that brings us to a severe reality check, which the analysis explores in depth.
Because when you look at the history of modern warfare, does bullying your neighbors actually force a superpower adversary to back down?
I'm looking at the historical precedents here, and the answer is a resounding no.
Yeah, not at all.
In fact, this specific brand of psychological warfare has a massive historical graveyard.
We actually have a perfect historical blueprint for why this fails. Just look at Saddam Hussein during the First Gulf War.
Oh, right.
When the U.S.-led coalition was preparing to push Iraqi forces out of Kuwait, Saddam fired a barrage of Scud missiles directly into Israel.
His psychological bet was that Israel would retaliate, enter the war, and instantly shatter the U.S. coalition.
Because he assumed Arab states wouldn't be caught dead fighting on the same side as the Israeli military.
But the mechanics of how the U.S. handled that are crucial. Washington didn't fold.
Nope. Instead, they deployed Patriot missile defense batteries to Israel and launched a massive dedicated air campaign to hunt down those Iraqi Scud launchers in the desert.
Wow. So they essentially bought Israel's restraint with a massive show of defensive support.
Exactly. Israel stayed out, the Arab coalition held firm, and Saddam's regime was decimated.
And we see a similar miscalculation playing out right now with Russia and Ukraine, right?
Very similar. To stop the West from supplying Kiev with weapons, Vladimir Putin relied heavily on escalate to de-escalate tactics.
Right. He raised the specter of nuclear weapons. Russian drones violated NATO airspace in Poland.
The Kremlin ramped up covert sabotage operations across Europe.
And the underlying assumption was that European voters are fundamentally comfortable and risk-averse, Yep. And the moment they felt a direct threat, they would demand their governments drop Ukraine to avoid World War III.
And the mechanism worked in the exact opposite direction.
Completely. Threatening Poland didn't make NATO back away. It made European nations realize the threat wasn't theoretical.
It triggered massive increases in European defense budgets and solidified the alliance.
But wait, I have to push back on this on behalf of you, the listener, because Saddam Hussein had a massive conventional standing army.
Right.
Russia has the world's largest nuclear arsenal. Iran operates through a decentralized, asymmetric network of proxy militias. Are these historical comparisons really apples to apples? Like, why would Tehran look at Saddam and Putin's blunders and think, yes, this time it will work for us?
Well, it's a vital question. The military capabilities are certainly different, but the psychological flaw is identical.
Oh, so?
Desperate regimes consistently misread the room because they project their own priorities onto their adversaries.
Oh.
Escalate to de-escalate only works if your target values short-term economic comfort over long-term survival.
Right.
Iran assumes these Gulf states are fundamentally fragile economies that will capitulate at the first sign of a stock market dip.
But when you start launching missiles at commercial centers, you cross a psychological tripwire.
Exactly. You force those nations to prioritize physical security above all else. When existential defense is on the line, nations don't fold, they dig in.
Which brings us directly to the reality on the ground right now.
Yeah.
Instead of scaring the region into submission, Iran is essentially blockading its own neighborhood and handing everyone a reason to fight back.
Let's look at the sheer geography of what they and their proxy Hezbollah have targeted recently.
It's massive. They are shooting at everyone from Azerbaijan down through Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Oman.
It is a stunningly wide net. I mean, you are talking about antagonizing virtually every major power broker and economic hub in the Middle East simultaneously.
So what does this all mean? Iran thought they were pulling a fire alarm to force a pause in the fighting, but they've actually just locked the doors and handed everyone inside a weapon.
That's a really good analogy. By striking civilian economies, they haven't bought peace. They've bought guaranteed, well-funded retaliation.
Let's talk about the mechanics of that retaliation, because the financial imbalance is staggering.
Take Saudi Arabia, for example.
Yeah.
The analysis highlights that Riyadh's defense budget for 2025 is roughly $78 billion.
Wow.
That is effectively 3 times the size of Iran's entire military budget. You are picking a fight with an entity that can outspend you 3-to-1 just on hardware.
And the reality is, countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE don't even need to scramble fighter jets to cause catastrophic damage to Tehran.
No, they don't.
They can wage devastating asymmetric warfare right back.
They can freeze Iranian shell companies operating in their jurisdictions.
Right. They can clamp down on the smuggling routes Iran relies on to bypass international sanctions.
They can quietly open their airspace to Israeli jets or feed real-time satellite intelligence to the U.S. military.
Precisely. And the blowback isn't just contained to the Persian Gulf, is it?
Not at all. It is actively pulling in European powers. NATO forces have already had to intercept projectiles over Turkish airspace.
Yeah, and we've seen a drone crash at a British sovereign military base in Cyprus.
A localized tactical gamble by Iran has suddenly triggered the security apparatus of the entire Western world.
Not to mention the global economic shockwaves, the analysis maps out how the economies of Asia, specifically massive manufacturing hubs like China, India, and Japan, are deeply physically dependent on oil flowing out of the Gulf.
Right. By threatening that supply line, the economic fallout is spiking energy prices as far away as Latin America.
And if an increasingly desperate Iranian regime decides to, say, launch a global terrorism campaign to increase the pressure, it's only going to harden this global consensus against them.
It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of total diplomatic and economic isolation.
Yeah.
But in the interest of being thorough, let's play devil's advocate for a moment. Let's assume Iran's calculus is somewhat right.
Oh, I love a good devil's advocate scenario. Let's hear it.
Okay, let's imagine the economic pain is so acute, so devastating, that these battered regional allies actually do break.
Okay.
Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, they all pick up the phone, they call Washington, they call Jerusalem, and they demand an immediate ceasefire.
They say, we don't care about the long-term threat anymore. You have to stop this war before our economies collapse.
Exactly. But the analysis argues that even in this flawless execution of Iran's strategy, there is a fatal flaw waiting at the very end of the line.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because the flaw isn't about military logistics or supply chains. The flaw is the psychological makeup of the specific leaders Iran is trying to pressure.
Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yep. Iran is relying on a domino effect. Hit the allies, the economic domino falls, the diplomatic domino falls, and finally, the U.S. and Israel are forced to stop.
But those final dominoes aren't going to fall because of the specific men in charge.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a profound misread of how these leaders operate under pressure.
Let's look at the breakdown of Donald Trump's political psychology first.
Right.
He has been a vocal Iran hawk since the 1980 hostage crisis. During his first term, he didn't just tweak U.S. policy, he entirely dismantled the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA.
And instituted a maximum pressure campaign.
Exactly. He considers the assassination of Qasem Soleimani one of his defining achievements.
And he publicly praised recent strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities as a, quote, spectacular success.
More importantly, look at the mechanism of how Trump responds to external demands.
Yeah, he has built his entire political brand on never capitulating to pressure, especially when it makes him look subservient to foreign leaders.
The analysis uses his approach to global tariffs as a prime example of this.
Right. When foreign allies complain about the economic fallout of his policies, he doesn't apologize and back down.
No, he typically doubles down to project dominance.
Exactly. The idea that he would yield to complaints from Gulf state executives about their profit margins while in the middle of a war with his oldest geopolitical adversary, it just completely ignores his behavioral history.
And you see a very similar, albeit ideologically driven, rigidity with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yes. His hawkish stance on Iran spans over 3 decades.
He has long framed a nuclear-armed Iran not just as a regional nuisance, but as an existential threat on par with the Soviet Union.
Wow.
He has spent his entire career expressing deep skepticism toward diplomatic appeasement.
Right. And right now, he believes he has a narrow historic window to degrade the Iranian military apparatus permanently.
Add the final critical mechanism to this equation: domestic politics.
Oh, yeah. Both of these men are navigating election years or intense domestic political pressure.
For both of them, a decisive, uncompromising military victory against a long-standing adversary is massive political capital.
They have a vested domestic interest in looking strong.
Which leads to the core thesis of the analysis. External pressure rarely softens leaders whose domestic survival depends on demonstrating unyielding strength.
So Iran is pulling diplomatic levers, totally unaware that the cables connecting those levers to Washington and Jerusalem were cut years ago.
Wow, yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's run the final calculus. The military strategy triggers massive blowback, unifying the region against them.
Right.
The diplomatic squeeze fails because Trump and Netanyahu are politically and psychologically hardwired to ignore it. If that is the reality, what is the end game for Tehran? Like, what does their country look like when the dust finally settles?
The final section of this analysis paints a remarkably grim picture of that endgame. Let's say, against all odds, a combination of shifting U.S. public opinion and sheer global economic exhaustion eventually forces a pause in the conflict.
Okay.
Even if Iran technically survives and gets the ceasefire they are bleeding for, they have inflicted permanent generational damage on themselves.
The economic suicide of the strategy is staggering.
It really is. Despite having massive oil reserves, Iran's domestic economy has been battered by sanctions for years.
They survive by relying on complex, quiet trade relationships with their neighbors.
And the analysis points out a vital metric here. An estimated 60% of Iran's non-oil trade is conducted with the countries right next door.
60%.
Before they started launching missiles this month, nations like Iraq, Turkey, and the UAE were among their top 5 economic partners.
Wow. They use these countries to launder money, move goods, and keep their state afloat.
And those are the exact nations they are currently terrorizing.
Yeah, you cannot rely on a neighbor to help you bypass international sanctions on Tuesday if you bombed their international airport on Monday.
Right. This raises an important question about the profound disconnect between Iran's ideological self-image and the reality of its actions. Tehran views itself as the natural historical hegemon of the Middle East, a destiny tied to their vast population, resources, and the legacy of ancient Persia.
But it is impossible to be the leader of a region when your only export is chaos.
Exactly.
You can't claim to be the protector of the Middle East while indiscriminately bombarding friend and foe alike.
No. And the analysis makes it very clear. The Middle East has a long, unforgiving memory.
The bridges Iran is burning right now will take generations to rebuild.
It exposes the tragedy of prioritizing short-term regime survival over long-term national prosperity.
Yeah.
The ultimate conclusion of the KULT analysis is that even if the Iranian regime survives the immediate threat of U.S. and Israeli bunker busters, and even if they somehow claim a tactical victory, it will be the definition of a Pyrrhic victory.
Because they will emerge from the rubble poorer, militarily degraded, and more isolated from their neighbors than at any point in their modern history.
It is compulsive strategic gambling.
It totally is. You can sit at the geopolitical table, roll the dice, and manage your risks perfectly for 50 years. But the moment you panic, push all your chips in and start throwing the wooden pieces at the spectators.
The odds violently turn against you.
The house always wins, and the tragedy is they will have engineered their own isolation.
It's a masterful breakdown of how a state can outsmart itself, really. Trading half a century of carefully cultivated regional influence for a panicked, destructive tantrum that ultimately burns down its own house.
It really is an incredible shift to witness. Well, that brings us to the end of our journey through this analysis of Iran's failing escalation strategy.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
To recap the ground we've covered today, we examined Iran's historic shift from a strategy of highly choreographed, low-casualty restraint to a chaotic, desperate, escalate to de-escalate doctrine.
We explored the mechanisms of why bullying neighbors failed for Saddam Hussein and Vladimir Putin, and why it's currently uniting the entire Middle East and European powers against Tehran.
We broke down the political psychology of Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, explaining why they are uniquely unsuited to fold under economic pressure.
And finally, we looked at how bombing your own trading partners guarantees a hollow, impoverished, Pyrrhic victory.
Breaking down the underlying causality of these events is the only way to truly understand the headlines we are being flooded with every day.
Absolutely.
But before we let you go, we want to leave you with one final lingering thought, a new thread to pull that builds directly on the mechanics we've discussed today.
What's that?
Well, the analysis mentions that right now, China is Iran's largest single trading partner.
Right.
But at the exact same time, China's massive manufacturing economy is fundamentally reliant on a stable, uninterrupted flow of oil coming out of the Persian Gulf.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
So here's the question for you to mull over. If Iran's new strategy is actively destabilizing that vital oil flow, militarizing the shipping lanes, and alienating the entire region, how long before Beijing does the math and decides that this chaotic partner is simply no longer worth the headache?
Wow.
And if China cuts Tehran loose to protect its own energy needs, what kind of massive geopolitical realignment does that force across the rest of Asia?
That is a fascinating, massive domino just waiting for a push.
It sure is. Something to think about the next time someone tries to tell you global politics is just a predictable, rational game.
Yeah.
Sometimes the most important variable isn't the moves on the board, it's realizing someone is completely willing to flip the table. Thanks for taking the time to learn with us today. Keep questioning the narrative, and we will catch you on the next Deep Dive.